A topic which perhaps many of us don't really value, but those perhaps who are the elders from our congregation will realize the importance of it. In terms of when they been through so many experiences in life, they then realize that people are of different types. Just because he or she is a Muslim doesn't necessarily mean that they are always going to be trustworthy, generous. They are always going to stick to their promises and stick to their words. But in fact, you have different types of Muslims and believers. You have those who are believers and their heart is clean. Their heart is purified. إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. Those believers are the ones who we try to aspire, who are our motivation. We want to be like them. The very beautiful hadith of Sunan al-Tirmidhi explains these types of people. They are those وَأَطَاعَهُ فِي السِّرِّ. They obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in privacy and in secrecy. وَكَانَ غَامِضًا فِي النَّاسِ. And they are those people who are discreet amongst the people. لَا يُشَارُ إِلَيْهِ بِالْأَصَابِعِ. Fingers are not pointed to them. In other words, they are those people, the real true mu'min, who obey Allah always. And on top of that, they are those who don't like the fame, who don't like people to know them, so much so that they are ghamidan fin nas. Ghamidan fin nas means that they'll be walking on the streets and people won't even realize and acknowledge their worth. And I was just explaining to our students of our ustad who came for our graduation ceremony a few months back, our Hazrat Sufi Tahir Wadi Sahib Hafidhahullah. And again, I'm not just saying it because I know some of you are going to say, oh, Mufti Sahib saying it because that's his ustad. And there's a bit of biasness. No, I am saying it genuinely. Genuinely. Someone who is pious. Someone who is from the Abdal and the Salihin. But what is a sign of his piousness? The hadith itself tells us that one of the traits will be ghamidan fin nas, that he will not be known by people. When we did the graduation ceremony poster, we wrote Hazrat Sufi Sahib will be there for the final hadith. Some brothers were messaging me, who is Hazrat Sufi Sahib? Classic example that these gems, people don't know who they are. If Hazrat Sufi Sahib was here in Birmingham and he was walking on the streets and the roads, Walford Road, Stratford Road, no one will know who he is. They'll just think he's an ordinary person. But it is these ordinary person, ordinary to you and I, but not to Allah. Because the hadith Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "Aghbatu awliya'i," that out of all the people, the ones who Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself is saying that I have the most envy for are basically those people who are discreet amongst the people. La yusharu ilayhi bil asabi', and the fingers are not pointed towards him. Meaning that if they were walking, no one would say that is a sheikh, that is a mufti, that is an imam, that is a scholar. So I was just saying about the different types of believers. So we have those believers whose hearts are clean. Then we have those believers whose hearts are unclean. Their hearts have a disease. And like with many diseases and many kind of sicknesses which are common, what happens to a disease? What happens in a pandemic? We have all lived through a COVID period recently. What happens? What happens is that if one is infected, everybody else gets infected. When one who is infected mixes with others, they make others infected as well. And there's no need for me to give example because we've seen this during the COVID period. One had COVID, he came to the masjid, the entire masjid ended up with COVID. Now, point being is that this is the same you could apply for a diseased heart. A person whose heart is diseased and sick. A person who has sicknesses. If he's got stinginess inside him. If there is khiyanat and treachery inside his heart. If there are other bad habits he has, lying, deceiving, then what happens is that he then corrupts the people who are around. He corrupts the people who are around. He's mentioned a hadith of Mishkat al-Masabih, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that there are two such traits, khiyanat and kizb, treachery, breaking agreements, breaking promises. And number two is lying. These two are such traits that it's not a person has been created with those. They actually come about because of the era or the community or the place where you are living. Do you know, as a human, when you are born, kullu mawludin yuladu ala fitra. Allah has created you not to have treachery. Like, it's not within human instinct to be khiyanat, to do betrayal, to deceive. It's not within us. Number two, lying. Lying is not within us. That's why you have those lie detector tests. Because the moment you lie, just naturally, whether you're a Muslim, non-Muslim, the moment you lie, your hair starts kind of rising. So lying and khiyanat are things which are not within us. But then why do we lie for? Why do people become so good at lying that they show no emotion? Why is it that people are in the habit of scamming and conning and deceiving? Is because of the time and the era or the people they are living with. And this is what I said about the diseased heart, because when one person has the habit of betraying and khiyanat and scamming and conning, it spreads to everybody else. Everybody else then behaves like that. And you see that amongst the masses nowadays where people talk like this. They'll say that, oh, he does this deception, I'm going to do it as well. So can you see how people are getting influenced by bad habits? Because it's like a disease, it's like a pandemic. It spreads from one person to another. And if it is not stopped or prevented, then it becomes so common, so widespread, that forget about deceiving and conning. Forget about deceiving and conning non-Muslims or Muslims. People then end up deceiving and conning their own family, their own parents. There's a story, wasn't it? Was it a month or so ago? May Allah forbid that it happens to any one of us, where a woman had killed her parents in somewhere down south, and their body was at home for 4 years. I think he killed them in 2019, just before COVID. So for 4 years, their bodies were left to rot at home. But why did she kill them for? She wanted to take money out of them because she had a gambling debt. She was addicted to gambling. So she kind of racked up thousands and thousands of pounds of debt. So the way she thought that she could pay it off, may Allah forbid, was to kill her parents and take the life insurance money or transfer their money into her account. So this is why khiyanat and these diseases of the hearts are so bad, because it's a pandemic. You know what happens with diseases of the heart is that when it is uncontrolled and no checks are done, people then start abusing and deceiving the people who are within their inner circles. It needs to be stopped. So this is why today's talk is a very important talk. We shouldn't think of this talk to be a Sufi spiritual type of talk. Because normally when people talk about spirituality and cleanliness of the heart, they think that, oh, this is one of those tasawwuf, tazkiyah, spirituality, zikr, azkar type of talk. No, brothers, no sisters. This is a talk and a topic which is part of our iman. Forget this spirit, don't make it an issue. Because this is a problem we have. That when we raise issues within our community, everyone likes to justify and say, oh, he's talking about spirituality. It doesn't concern us. I'm not a Sufi. When we talk about hadith, oh, it doesn't concern us. When we talk about Quran, no. It is part of our iman. Forget about spirituality. This is not about Sufism. Cleaning your heart is not about Sufism. It's a part of our iman, the very famous hadith known as Hadith Jibreel. Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam asked Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, فَأَخْبِرْنِي عَنِ الْإِحْسَانِ. Inform me about spiritual excellence. Ihsan means spiritual excellence. Ihsan means excellence. Ihsan means to have your heart so clean, so purified, that أَن تَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَى, that you worship Allah as though you can see Him. And do you know that hadith, believe me, that hadith, to worship Allah, to pray namaz and to imagine Allah is right in front of you, trust me, will only be possible when your heart is clean. Trust me, if your heart is black with gunas, with sins, with shahwa, with lust and cravings for the dunya, hirsul mal, trust me, you could pray as many namazis as you want. You can show to people how much concentration you're showing in prayers, but your heart is not connected with Allah. It's going to be connected to somewhere else. Yes, your limbs may be connected, but your heart is somewhere else. So that's why it's important that you sort yourself out. You ensure that these diseases of the heart are rooted out. And when your heart is clean and pure, then inshallah you yourself will see the benefits of your prayers. Now I have a few slides in front of you just very quickly. The first slide which we have, the heart-mind connection. Allah says in the Quran, which can be found in Surah Al-An'am, وَجَعَلْنَا عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ أَكِنَّةً أَن يَفْقَهُوهُ وَفِي آذَانِهِمْ وَقْرًا, which means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put a covering over our hearts. Akinna means a covering, a parda, a veil over our hearts, lest أَن يَفْقَهُوهُ, that we understand. What does that mean? What's he trying to say from this ayat? Is the center of intellect isn't your brain. It's not your brain. You always think that. Being aqil or sane is a condition for something to be made farz. That's a different rule altogether. But in terms of your a'mals and your deep connection with the a'mal, the center of attention is your heart. It's not your brain, it's your heart. There are cells in your heart which communicate with your brain. Whilst your brain sends messages to your heart sometimes sends messages to your brain. That's why there's a term we use, even the non-Muslims use it. What does your heart say? What does your mind say, your brain say? Meaning brain tells you one thing, heart is telling you another thing. Brain tells you logical stuff, that don't do this, don't do that. Heart says something else. You want to marry someone. Logic says don't marry her. But your heart says marry her. So what does that tell you? It tells us that sometimes our heart actually takes over our brain, doesn't it? How many decisions we've made in our lives, which were all on the heart, meaning that we knew it was wrong, logically, but because our heart couldn't control the desires, we went ahead and did it. That's why it's mentioned in the hadith. حُبُّكَ الشَّيْء يُعْمِي وَيُسِمُّ. Love for something makes you blind and makes you deaf. Like in other words, when you love something, love comes from the heart. It literally shuts down your other senses of your body. Your brain doesn't function. Your eyes don't function, and nor does your ears function. So you just allow your heart to kind of make the decision for you. Now, obviously, we don't have time to talk about everything in detail, but what we can understand from here is the heart is the key thing. You know, these people like the mushrikeens during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, they were very smart people. Abu Jahl was very smart. Abu Lahab was very smart. But when it came to Iman, there's examples of it in the Quran. They came up with the most silly and the most random of excuses and reasons as to why they didn't want to believe. Even nowadays, with some non-Muslims, very smart in everything else in life. But when it comes to Iman, they act the most foolish. They act the most foolish that you think that a child has more samaj and more understanding than them. So what does that tell us? That tells us that it's not about how intellectual you are, how smart you are. It's all linked with your heart. The moment there's a veil over your heart, that's it. You lose any kind of connection whatsoever. The next slide I've already mentioned in passing, the different types of people. I said, those who are believers, those whose hearts will be alive on the day of judgment. Then you have the disbelievers, whose hearts are dead. Dead. Nothing goes in. Allah has blackened their hearts. And then you have the hypocrites who have sicknesses in their hearts. وَفِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٌ فَزَادَهُمُ اللَّهُ مَرَضًا. So the hypocrites, or even in this word hypocrite, you could even argue that perhaps we also fall under this category as well. In terms of, we say one thing but we do others. So our heart is full of sickness. There's problems. Now, what are the examples of diseases of the heart? If we just quickly look at this slide. These are some of the examples. Again, it's not a complete list, but just some common ones, such as hatred is one, envy, doubts, arrogance, shirk, fantasizing, displeasure with the divine decree. So in other words, not being happy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decision, and anger. Now we don't have time to go over all of them, but as you can see, there are some which are here which aren't good for us Muslims to have. If I just pick out one of them, arrogance. Takabbur we call it. That is a very, very bad habit to have. A bad trait to have. As mentioned in the hadith, is one of those which actually lowers your reverence in the eyes of Allah, but also at the same time, arrogance lowers your respect and your self-dignity in the eyes of the people. In the eyes of the people. I'm sure us sitting here, how many arrogant people you know? And how many of those arrogant people you are put off by them? They come and speak to you, just get naturally put off. I don't want to hear you. You're too arrogant. You know when people always big themselves up, what happens? Naturally, you just don't like them. You don't want to hear them. So arrogance is something which puts people off. You lose respect in Allah's eyes, but also at the same time, in the eyes of the people, your status and your rank also decrease as well. And the opposite, what's the opposite of takabbur? Is tawadu', humbleness. And humbleness is such a great and amazing quality that what happens? Man tawadu'a lillah rafa'ahu Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always elevate you. When we see the great shuyukh who are out there, they've reached that level because of tawadu. They don't go around and tell everyone how knowledgeable they are. They don't go around and use every opportunity to say, Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They don't go around and use every opportunity to give a fatwa. They just be humble. When people ask them, they give an answer. If people don't ask them, then alhamdulillah, they're happy. The hadith of Sunan ibn Majah is on the very first page of Sunan ibn Majah, where Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, now again, some of the students who are here, the Muqtadis who are here, we know Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, very famous muhaddith, very famous sahabi. He's narrated many, many hadiths, more ahadith than Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu. But it's mentioned in one of the narrations that there was a tabi'i, and he was in Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu's presence for 18 months. 1.5 years, he went every majlis, every gathering to Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. But never did he hear Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu once say, Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like in other words, any gathering Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu had, he never quoted a hadith. But he's a sahabi. He's a muhaddith. But yet he did not quote a hadith. Now, I'm not saying he never quoted hadith, but the point I'm trying to make is that where there was a need for him to reference and quote hadith, he did it. But where there was not a need for him to quote or reference a hadith, he was like an ordinary person. And that is, brothers and sisters who may be at the back, is what we mean by tawadu. Yeah, where there's a time to show your ilm, then fair enough. But then in ordinary times, in normal times, you should just be like a humble person, like Prophet ﷺ was. When he was in a masjid, he needed to give a bayan or a sermon, he then gave the bayan and the sermon. But then outside of that, he was like an ordinary person at home. He used to do the chores at home. He used to stitch his own sandals and shoes. He would kind of do the khidmah of the household. He would milk the animals. And when it would be salah time, he would go, drop everything, and he would go and pray salah. So inshallah, the crux of today's talk is to kind of show everyone the severity of diseases of the heart. And why is it important that we cleanse and we purify our hearts? The diseases of the hearts are literally like a pandemic. If it's not stopped, then it spreads to others. Everyone will then take it as the norm to have such traits and such behaviors. So the more, inshallah, we kind of concentrate on our Islah, the more, inshallah, better it will be personally for ourselves, because then we'll be able to have that direct connection with Allah when we are worshipping, and ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tara. And obviously with Ramadan now around the corner, it's only a few months left now, isn't it? March, most likely this year, so it's 4 months. So with Ramadan around the corner, it's more important that we slowly start making some tartib, start making some plans, inshallah, in how we can better ourselves in the month of Ramadan. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that inshallah gives us all tawfiq to act upon what has been said. Jazakallah khair for listening. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.